The wind howled across the empty field as a tired man in a worn military jacket stood in front of an abandoned farmhouse, clutching two small backpacks and watching his twins huddle close together. Beside him stood a loyal dog, ears alert, eyes scanning the silent land as if it sensed something the others could not. Just hours earlier, that man had been standing in a warm home surrounded by family. Now, he had nowhere to go, nowhere to sleep, and no idea that his life was about to change forever. The cruel twist of fate was almost unbelievable. The man had no clue that somewhere out there, a forgotten fortune worth $200 million carried his name. And the ones who had just thrown him out would soon regret everything. Before we continue this emotional journey, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel if you believe that kindness, second chances, and unexpected miracles can still exist in this world. Your support helps stories like this reach more people. The man standing in the field was Daniel Hayes, a former Navy SEAL who had spent most of his life protecting others. War had hardened him, but fatherhood had softened him in ways he never expected. After losing his wife to a sudden illness 3 years earlier, his entire world revolved around his 7-year-old twins, Emma and Lucas. They were the only light in his otherwise quiet life. When his military service ended due to an injury, Daniel had little savings left. Medical bills and everyday expenses had slowly drained everything he had. With nowhere else to go, he reluctantly accepted the offer from his late wife's parents to stay with them temporarily. At first, the arrangement seemed manageable. The large suburban home looked welcoming enough. But behind the polished floors and expensive furniture lived a quiet resentment that grew stronger every day. Daniel's in-laws had never approved of him. To them, he was just a rough soldier who had dragged their daughter into a life of uncertainty. They never said it directly, but their cold glances and dismissive comments made their feelings painfully clear. Weeks passed, and the tension slowly turned into hostility. They complained about the children being noisy, about Daniel not having a high-paying job yet, about the cost of groceries and electricity. Even the loyal dog, Ranger, became a source of irritation for them. Ranger had served alongside Daniel during his military days, trained to detect danger and protect his partner. But to the in-laws, he was nothing more than a dirty animal taking up space. The breaking point came on a rainy evening that Daniel would never forget. Without warning, his father-in-law erupted into a bitter speech about responsibility and pride. Accusations filled the living room like thunder. Daniel was called a failure, a burden, a man who could not provide for his own children. Before Daniel could even respond, 2 suitcases were placed near the door. His mother-in-law coldly told him that it was time for him to figure things out on his own. Within minutes, Daniel and his children were standing outside in the rain while the door closed behind them. The sound of the lock clicking echoed in the silence like a final judgment. Emma clutched her father's hand tightly while Lucas tried to stay brave, though his small face trembled with confusion. Ranger stood beside them, his protective presence unwavering. Daniel did not argue. Years of discipline had taught him that sometimes the only response to cruelty was quiet endurance. He gathered the children, packed what little they had, and walked away from the house that had never truly welcomed them. That long walk eventually brought them to the forgotten farmhouse at the edge of town. It was old, fragile, and half-collapsed, but it offered something they desperately needed: shelter. The roof creaked, the windows were broken, and the wooden boards groaned with every step. But to the twins, it felt like an adventure. To Daniel, it felt like survival. The first night was cold. Daniel built a small fire outside using scraps of wood he found scattered around the yard. The twins sat close together wrapped in old blankets while Ranger lay near them, alert and watchful. Daniel stared into the flames, wondering how life had turned so quickly. Just a few years earlier, he had led dangerous missions across the world with confidence and purpose. Now, his greatest mission was simply protecting his children from uncertainty. Days passed in a quiet routine. Daniel searched for work during the mornings while the twins stayed near the farmhouse playing simple games and exploring the surrounding fields. Ranger followed Daniel everywhere, his instincts always active. Despite the hardship, Daniel tried to keep the children hopeful. He told them stories about bravery, about never giving up, about how even the darkest nights eventually give way to sunrise. But fate had its own plans. One afternoon, while Daniel repaired part of the broken porch, Ranger suddenly became restless. The dog sniffed the ground intensely near the old barn behind the farmhouse. He barked sharply, digging at a patch of dirt with determined energy. Daniel initially ignored it, assuming Ranger had found some buried animal scent. But the barking continued, louder and more urgent. Curious, Daniel walked over. Ranger had already uncovered part of a small rusted metal box buried beneath the soil. Daniel pulled it free and brushed away the dirt. Inside were old documents sealed in plastic and a small engraved key. At first, the papers seemed meaningless. They contained legal records, names, and financial statements that Daniel barely recognized. But one name stood out immediately. It was the name of his estranged grandfather, a wealthy industrialist Daniel had never met. Years earlier, a bitter family dispute had cut off all contact between them. Daniel had always assumed his grandfather had forgotten him entirely. But the documents revealed something shocking. The old man had died months earlier and left behind a massive estate. After a long search for living heirs, investigators had finally traced the inheritance to Daniel. The estate included properties, investments, and company shares worth nearly $200 million. Daniel stared at the papers in disbelief. For a long moment, the world seemed completely silent. The same man who had been thrown out of a house for being worthless was now the sole heir to an unimaginable fortune. Yet strangely, the discovery did not fill him with anger or revenge. Instead, Daniel looked toward the farmhouse where his twins were laughing while chasing fireflies in the fading evening light. Their joy had survived poverty, rejection, and uncertainty. That realization mattered far more than the money. Within weeks, the legal process confirmed everything. The inheritance was real. The farmhouse property itself had once belonged to Daniel's grandfather decades ago, which explained the hidden documents. News traveled quickly through the town. Eventually, it reached the ears of the same in-laws who had thrown Daniel out into the rain. Suddenly, their tone changed. Apologies appeared. Invitations were extended. They spoke about family unity and misunderstandings. But Daniel understood something important now. Wealth had not changed their hearts. It had only exposed them. Instead of returning to them, Daniel chose a different path. He used part of the fortune to restore the old farmhouse into a beautiful home filled with warmth and laughter. Another portion went toward helping struggling veterans and families who had nowhere else to turn. Daniel remembered exactly how it felt to be judged and abandoned during the hardest moment of his life. Ranger remained at his side, the loyal hero who had unknowingly uncovered the truth buried beneath the earth. Years later, the story of the Navy SEAL, his twins, and the faithful dog became a quiet legend in the town. Not because of the fortune, but because of the strength it took to remain kind when the world showed cruelty. If this story is touching your heart so far, take a moment to comment below with the word kindness. It helps spread positivity and reminds others that compassion still matters. One peaceful evening, Daniel sat on the restored porch watching Emma and Lucas play in the yard. Ranger rested nearby, older now but still proud and watchful. The setting sun painted the sky with golden colors as laughter echoed across the field where hardship had once stood. Daniel realized something powerful in that moment. The inheritance had changed their circumstances, but it had not created their happiness. That had come from resilience, love, and the quiet loyalty of a dog who refused to ignore what was hidden. And perhaps that was the greatest treasure of all. Before we finish, if this story moved you even a little, please like, comment, and share this video. Your engagement helps spread stories that remind the world how powerful kindness and hope can truly be.